This is Algebra 1, Lesson 2D, talking about quadrilaterals. This lesson talks about 5 different types of quadrilaterals. Now, all of these have something in common. They're all going to have 4 sides, okay? So that's our broad category, quadrilaterals. You have a parallelogram. Let's zoom in here and look at that. The opposite sides are parallel. If you were to extend this side and keep it going forever, and this side and keep it going forever, they would never cross. They would never intersect, and neither would these. So it has 2 pair of parallel sides, and they're also equal. So we could mark them with the tick marks. We could say these have to be equal, and these have to be equal. Okay? So that's a parallelogram. A rectangle is a parallelogram because it also has opposite, equal, and parallel sides. But a rectangle is a little more special in that it has all right angles. So it is a parallelogram, but it is a very special one, specific one with all right angles. A square is a rectangle, so that means it's also a parallelogram, but it is even more special because all of its sides are equal. We talked about that a little bit ago in another video. But all of its sides are equal and all of its angles are equal. So it is a regular quadrilateral we talked about. If you look at a rhombus is a parallelogram, but all of its sides are equal. So all of its sides. So it's similar to a square, except it doesn't have right angles. Now, your book calls this a trapezoid and not a trapezium. Okay. So a trapezoid is not a parallelogram because it does not have 2 pair of parallel sides. It does have 1 pair of parallel sides. This side and this side, those are parallel. If you extended them out, they would not cross. But if you look at these sides, you say, well, they don't cross. No, but what if you extended them out? They would, wouldn't they? They would cross. So a trapezoid has 1 pair of parallel sides. And here it says 2, but it doesn't say 2 pair. It says 2 sides are parallel. So this side and this side are parallel, and that would be a pair like we were talking about earlier. All right, and it says 2 sides are not parallel, and we pointed that out as well. Now, I find it helpful to think about this in a Venn diagram. So I went on the internet and found us a Venn diagram here. Now, if you're familiar with Venn diagrams, hopefully this will help. If you're not, let's talk a little bit about Venn diagrams for just a second. Let me go over here to the side. Okay. Let's talk about a city. Let's talk about Atlanta. Okay. Atlanta is a city. Atlanta is in the state of Georgia. Okay. And Georgia is in the United States. And the United States is in North America. Okay. And we could keep going. We could talk about the Western Hemisphere. We could talk about Earth. We could talk about our solar system, right? But I think this is enough for us to see. Now, some of you listening to this maybe don't live in Atlanta, okay? But maybe you live in Georgia. So you would have another little bubble over here. Maybe you live in Athens, okay? That's another city that's in Georgia, but it's not in Atlanta. Okay, maybe you don't live in North America. Maybe you live in Europe. And that's going to be a separate circle over here. Okay, so this is just a way to organize and categorize things. So another thing that you need to see is if you live in Atlanta, you also live in Georgia, the United States, and North America. But if you live in the United States, you don't necessarily live in Georgia or Atlanta. You could, but not necessarily. There's a lot of people who live in the United States that do not live in Georgia, right? So let's look at this diagram again of quadrilaterals. So we can see that our general category here that everybody's fitting in of what we're talking about here they're polygons. And polygons you can have, we've talked about 3-sided ones, triangles, 4-sided quadrilaterals, and that's what this one's going to focus on. It's just quadrilaterals, okay? Not all polygons are quadrilaterals, right? But a lot of them are, okay? And inside of the quadrilateral circle, you have trapezoids, okay? And you have parallelograms. So here's a parallelogram, which is not the same as a trapezoid. So they're not in the same circle, kind of like Athens and Atlanta were not in, Athens was not in Atlanta, right? But they were both in Georgia. So parallelograms and trapezoids are both in the quadrilateral circle, but they are not the same. They have some things in common. Inside of parallelograms, we have this parallelogram circle right here, okay? Inside of that, we can talk about rectangles and we can talk about rhombuses, okay? Or you may hear it called rhombi. All of these, rectangles, squares, and rhombuses, are parallelograms. They have 2 pair of opposite equal parallel sides. But you have some special things going on. Remember, we said rectangles have all right angles, and so do squares. But rhombuses have all equal sides, and so do squares. So you see how squares is kind of in between rectangles and rhombuses because they share the fact that they have all equal sides. Squares and rhombuses do. But squares and rectangles share the fact that they all have 90-degree angles. So I'm hoping that this Venn diagram here will help you understand the relationships between the quadrilaterals that your book talks about.